Well, good morning, gents. Thanks for coming and joining me here to have a wee chat about fermentation. So I'm interested in what your opinions are around about the importance of fermentation in terms of temperature, pitching rate, time, all that with regards to flavour development. So just kind of interested in what you think around about that. Maybe you want to start, Gordon. What's important parameters in fermentation?
Well, fermentation is extremely important in flavour creation, and particularly in the floral area, the fruit area, and strangely enough, and people forget this, with peatedness as well, because you stretch peatedness or keep it in the medicinal area or in the smoky area, and that changes with fermentation. The important parameters are how much yeast you put in, what temperature that yeast experiences, the sort of pitching temperature that you put it in. You can either temperate the washback, keep the temperature constant, as a few Scottish distilleries do, and I think some the new startups do, and perhaps we can talk to that later. Or you just let the natural temperature. As yeast grows, it produces heat. All living organisms do that, and so the temperature of the washback goes up as fermentation goes on. So if it gets too hot, the yeast gets too stressed, and it will die and stop making flavour compounds. So that's sort of, you don't want to see it going over 34, 35 degrees C. So you control everything, your starting parameters. The concentration of sugar, the concentration, or the temperature, to get that nice profile if you're controlling the temperature, you can put more yeast in at the beginning.
Right. And
so you get a faster fermentation. As I say, Irish distilleries typically do that, and so you can have a faster fermentation, which effectively puts up the capacity of your
increase your production. Yeah.
Very good for, as I say, for floral flavours, fruit flavours, but you tend not to get that long finish, which is very typical of Scotch whisky, that sort of leathery, almost licoricey flavour, where that flavour starts to interact with peated flavours as well, and that long after flavour that is very typical of Scotch whiskies, but not of our Irish whiskies. You tend not to get them if you temperate the washback. So it's a choice of the distiller.
Yeah. So we've got two distillers. So how do you control your fermentation at the moment, Scott? Is it important to control?
No, I think it is. I mean, as you rightly said, I think the yeast has got a limitation on it, and we use specialty yeast which have even lower threshold for temperature. We do our manufacturing slightly different, and what I mean by that is we use stainless steel washbacks that are outside. So that is, you'll see any variation from typical Scotland. You get sunny one day and cold the next day. But we are slightly different, that we have a mash filter, so I don't do one mash to one washback. I do 4 mashes to one washback. So over a period of time of 24 hours, I'm actually controlling the temperature within the washback, because I'm continuing to add cool water to it all the time.
The water temperature.
So that then gives me a profile where I'm holding it back for about 24 hours. Then once I let it go, the temperature profile then does the standard point, but for us, that gives us the flavour profile that we're looking for. We've done some work about extending the fermentation to see the effect it has in flavour, but we're finding that for the characteristics that we have, that even extending it a lot longer, we're still getting the basis of our flavour. So we know that the flavour we produce within the first 60 hours is no different if you add an extra 100 hours onto it, but that's just through trial and error understanding it. Temperature control with it being outside is very difficult. I know that there is technology to control it a lot more, and it's something that we are looking at this moment in time, because yeast is important, and it's really just understanding what we can do. Fermentation is a lever, as you talk about, but it's just really understanding how much of an influence do we have on our flavour, which is specific to us.
Yeah. So you're thinking about temperature control for your washbacks. Is that something that you're thinking of putting in place?
We've built cooling jackets onto our washbacks. We haven't piped them up or added the equipment to use them yet, but a bit of that's trial and error. See, our fermenters sit directly above our stills, because we're a vertical distillery and we're on ridiculously small site. So we have to see how good our ventilation is, how hot our fermenters are going to get, if it is going to cause us problems, or if it's going to develop our character, or where that tipping point is of if and when we need to look at cooling them.
Yeah, so I've seen a bit of research, Gordon, in brewing, that keeping the temperature down can increase esters and things. Is that something that's been done in distilling? Any research on that?
Yes, if you keep the temperature down, you do get more flavour compounds being produced because the metabolism of the yeast is slower. So it has, if you like, has time to start making these congeners. The problem with it, if you slow it down too much, you get invading organisms start to come in, wild yeast start to come in, or other organisms start to come in, and they start using sugar. So you find that in the worst case scenario, you get a stuck fermentation. The yeast doesn't even grow because it's outcompeted by these other organisms, and they're not making alcohol. So you won't. A good indication, as we know, of infection is lower yields. You start to see lower yields. So if you slow it down too much, that's what happens. If you speed it up by cranking up the temperature without tempering, without cooling it down, having water jackets or whatever on it, is you get very fast fermentations, and the temperature then goes up too high, and it kills the yeast. But also the yeast itself is just making biomass. It's just making. It's not putting. It's not making these other metabolites, these other flavour congeners. It's just making other yeasts, and so you get a lot of yeast growth, but you don't get much flavour. So there's a happy medium in between, just getting that rate of fermentation just in the right sweet spot.
Yeah, because you're looking for that wild yeast contamination in a sense later on.
Later on, yes.
To get your flavour. So how do we measure the flavour? You've got flavours you wish. How do we measure that we've got the right flavour, the right components of esters or whatever we want to say? Is that just sensory?
I think for us it's just the purely sensory in the final distillate, and it's been built up over the years and understanding how your own site functions throughout the year. As we alluded to, outside, so you're going to see the low temperatures during the winter and higher temperatures during the summer, and it's just been able to balance and understand what corrections we have to do in order to try and maintain the consistency so that the product I produce in the start of the year is the same as it is at the end of the year. And that just takes time and effort and focus on it.
I think it has to be sensory.
Yeah.
It has to be sensory, and being able to link sensory changes to changes in manufacturing, whether that's fermentation, whether that's cuts, whether that's what's happening in the mash tun, even raw materials.
Yes.
But being able to link the two together is key to this, to keeping a consistent spirit.
That must be quite difficult sometimes with so much going on to pinpoint it being fermentation or it being processing or whatever. So there's no chemical tests that we can do yet.
Of course, there are chemical tests that are extremely useful, particularly for looking at consistency of spirits, looking at the profiles of whatever class of chemical moiety or whatever congener you're looking at, whether that's esters, aldehydes, whatever, alcohols. So those profiles are very detailed, and they can give you you're producing a consistent spirit. They can also pick up very quickly contaminants coming in before you might pick it up. You can see shifts there. So that's important from that point of view. But at the end of the day, it's the sensory test that's important.
Yeah. So moving forward, Andy, have you come up with times, gravities for your works, what you think you're going to do going forward?
Only very, very vaguely. I think a lot of it is seeing how the equipment's going to run, how it's going to work, how the fermentations happen, say how the temperature in the still house affects the fermentation. So I think we've got to be quite open in that regard. And again, there's maybe some limits to how long we could allow a fermentation to go from process and commercial standpoint. But yeah, it's going to be led by the equipment and by by the spirit that comes out the other end.
And any innovations in the pipeline, Scott, that you
Well,
not too secret?
No, I think for us, the fermentation being outside, we are at the mercy of the weather. So for me, I'd like to look at how we can control the temperatures a little bit more to see if that has an impact on the flavour. It's one of these until you try it. It might be that there is a benefit to it. It might be that what we've got is the best setup. But so we're always continually looking at how we can understand the flavour profile of our process all the time.
Yeah, so
I found with outside fermenters, the problem has always been them getting too hot. You know, the wash being too hot. So how do you cool them down? And different distilleries, for instance, just put cold water over the top. Seems a bit perverse that in Scotland that actually high temperatures is the problem. It's the summer temperatures that's the issue, because we're really talking of a pitching temperature, you know, probably no lower than 16, but somewhere between 16 and 20, plenty would be a bit high probably, but somewhere in between there was optimum for.
So controlling the washbacks, you mentioned that it's quite common in Ireland.
Yes.
Is that for processing reasons, or is it a historical reason? Any idea?
Processing reasons, because if you're not looking for that those deeper flavours, those you're not looking for peated finish, then you're looking for a lighter spirit. You're looking for floral spirits. Then temperation is the way to go.
And traditionally, that's what Ireland would be looking for.
And that's what traditionally they're looking for. And so you'd go that way. It's interesting as they're developing their industry, you see lots of different, they're getting into, traditionally they used triple stills, now making pot stills whiskies as well. They're trying all sorts of different innovations, and so you're beginning to see beginning to switch off the temperation in some of the distilleries to be more of a Scotch profile. There, it's horses for courses. What do you want at the end of the day? What are you looking for in your spirit? And so you have to start off with that idea. What I want
I think it's
feel
also
like.
you know your own environment. So it may be that your distillery, the temperature going at lower doesn't have as big an impact to somewhere else, because it's really depending on the surroundings and what's come before it and what your process is. I mean, for us, how we do it with the 4 mashes is unique to what we do, and that has its own implications for the flavour profile we're creating. And for me, going beyond no additional hours does not have any detriment or any additional flavour profiles. So that's why the profile that we've got for the fermentation temperature and time is specific to what we've found over the years has been the best for us.
But I would say 60-hour fermentation is probably already quite a long fermentation. It's longish fermentation, if you like, and a very long fermentation. So I wouldn't expect there to be massive differences there.
But at some distilleries, that extra time would make a difference, because I'm aware of one distiller who's now up at 160.
Yes.
Why?
They've determined that gives them a completely different flavour profile to what they were producing before. So they've been allowed to experiment and to understand their setup. By going that extra 100 hours is giving them a different flavour profile, more in tune to what they're looking for.
Quite how they manage shift patterns and weekend working, I have no idea what that must be a real problem.
But for them, they've went from a lot or bigger volume to a smaller volume, but of a completely different character that they feel is better for them than what it was when it was a more volume. Which just goes to show you that you understand the fermentation that suits your requirements.
Yes.
What you do, and that can be depending on your equipment or what you're trying to achieve in outcome. And it's also to do with the distillation, because if you change the fermentation, are you going to realise that in your distillation? So your final spirit.
Yeah. So do you think fermentation, gravities, rates, temperatures, do you think that's something that will be a lot of work on in the future? Because it doesn't seem to be a lot of work done on that in my past. I'm just wondering if it's going to be more important going forward.
I think as you're creating your own identity, you have to understand the setup that you've got, because a lot of it is a theory, and until you start producing it, that theory then becomes the actual. So it's really understanding what your equipment can do and what the effect on timing does to your fermentation. So we did that at the very start to understand that I suppose the parameters that we've got now, we didn't happen upon it. It took years and years and years of continually reviewing it that's the optimum for what we're trying to produce.
And it's obviously something that is in the forefront of your mind going forward.
Absolutely. And I think as a new distillery and a smaller distillery, and you're looking for things to differentiate and to build your distillery character. So yeah, it's definitely something you want to look at and to study and to build on as you move forward. And yeah, I think there will be more as more new distilleries come on, because there doesn't seem to be much slowing down in the rate of people building new Scotch whisky distilleries. So they're all going to have to look for something to be their identity. Yeah.
I think it depends on where you are in the sort of the development of your whisky.
Yeah.
If you're new, that optimization, you start off optimize on yield, and then you optimize on flavour after that. Where do you want it to be? Once you're optimized on that, and you have products to support, you don't change the recipe. You have it very much set. Circumstances will make you change the recipe, and the obvious one is temperature change. Seasonally or between years. Raw material changes as well might make you processability of different barley strains, for instance. In fermentation, if you're trying different yeasts, that's going to change the temperature profiles that or the dynamics of what's going on. But getting it optimized for the flavour that you want is the key.
So it's all about getting what you want for your site, for your spirit. Excellent. Well, thanks very much, chaps. That was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.